I don't want to be alone, said the Apache girl, and the rancher let her stay. The sun was just beginning to sink behind the distant hills, painting the sky with colors of orange and pink. The wind blew gently across the open land, carrying the smell of dried grass and the faint scent of wildflowers that had survived the harsh summer heat. The ranch stretched for miles, empty except for the few cows grazing in the distance and the small wooden house where the rancher lived. The world seemed quiet and still, almost as if it were holding its breath. The rancher, a tall man with strong hands and a weathered face, moved carefully along the fence line, checking each post to make sure it was secure. He had lived here for many years, far away from towns and townspeople. Life on the ranch was hard and lonely, but he had grown used to it. He spent his days tending to the animals, repairing fences, and walking the open fields. The quiet suited him, and he liked the peace of being alone. But that evening something unusual caught his attention. Near the edge of the fence, almost hidden among the tall grass, stood a young girl. She was small and delicate, with dark hair that fell in loose waves over her shoulders. Her clothes were simple and worn, and her bare feet left small marks in the dusty ground. She was staring at him with wide, nervous eyes, and the rancher froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. The girl did not run. She did not hide. She simply stood there, looking tired and afraid, yet somehow brave. Her lips trembled slightly as she spoke, her voice soft and almost breaking. I don't want to be alone, she said. The words were quiet but clear, and they seemed to float on the evening air. The rancher blinked, surprised. No one had ever spoken to him like this before, not with such honesty and vulnerability. He took a careful step closer, his boots crunching softly on the dry ground. "Who are you?" he asked gently. He was not used to talking to strangers, especially not children who wandered near his land. But something in her eyes made him pause, made him listen instead of turning her away. The girl looked down at her feet, then back at him, her dark eyes shining with fear and hope at the same time. I have no one," she whispered. I am lost." Her small hands clutched the edge of her dress as if holding on to some invisible protection. The rancher could see that she had been through much more than a child should ever face. Her face was dusty, her hair tangled, and her shoes were missing. Yet there was a strength in her stance, a quiet determination that spoke louder than words. The rancher's heart softened. He had seen many things in his life, storms, wild animals, even other people, but he had never met someone so alone and yet so brave. He knew the world could be cruel, especially to someone like her. He also knew that helping her could bring danger. The land was remote, yes, but rumors traveled, and not everyone would understand why he was showing kindness to a lone girl. He could hear the caution in his own thoughts, warning him to stay away. Still, he felt something he had not felt in years, a desire to protect, to offer safety, even if only for a little while. He nodded slowly. "Come with me," he said, motioning toward the small cabin near the ranch. "You can stay there tonight." His voice was calm, steady, and without judgment. The girl's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked as if she could not believe it. She hesitated, then slowly stepped toward him, her bare feet brushing against the dry earth. The rancher watched her carefully, noting how cautious she was, how every step seemed measured and thoughtful. It was clear she had learned to survive on her own, moving carefully through a world that had not been kind to her. Inside the cabin, the rancher lit a small lantern and set it on the wooden table. The warm glow filled the room, casting soft shadows on the walls. The girl looked around, her eyes taking in the simple furniture, the bed, a few wooden chairs, and shelves with basic supplies. She seemed both curious and wary, as if she had never seen a place like this before. The rancher prepared a simple meal of bread and cheese, placing it on the table. "Eat," he said gently. "You must be hungry." She nodded, her small hands trembling as she reached for the food. As she ate, she told him a little about herself, though not in complete sentences. Her words came slowly, haltingly, like drops of water in a dry stream. She said she had been separated from her family, that she had been traveling alone for many days, and that she had nowhere else to go. The rancher listened quietly, offering small nods and soft words of encouragement. He did not interrupt, did not question her. He simply let her speak, letting the words fill the quiet room. In her voice he could hear sorrow, fear, and hope all at once. He could feel the weight of her loneliness, the emptiness that she carried inside her, and he understood, perhaps for the first time in many years, what it meant to feel truly needed by someone. As the night grew darker, the wind howled softly outside, rattling the cabin windows. The rancher could see the girl's small figure curled up on the bed, her eyes heavy with sleep but her mind still alert. He sat in the chair nearby, watching over her, feeling a strange sense of connection that neither of them could explain. In that quiet, lonely cabin, two lives, so different and yet so alike, began to intertwine. The rancher thought about the days ahead. He knew this was only the beginning of a journey neither of them fully understood. He also knew that helping her would not be easy. There would be questions, doubts, and challenges. But for tonight, he made a silent promise to himself. He would keep her safe. He would give her a place to stay, a moment of peace in a world that had been harsh and unforgiving. Outside, the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, bright against the darkness. The wind softened, carrying a gentle calm over the open land. For the first time in many years, the rancher felt a quiet hope. And the girl, lying on the simple bed, felt a small sense of safety that she had not known in a long time. In the stillness of that evening, a bond began to form. A bond of trust, courage, and the quiet strength of two people learning to care for one another. And so the night passed slowly, wrapped in silence and the gentle rhythm of breathing. Neither spoke much, but words were not necessary. In that cabin, in that remote place, two lonely hearts had found a fragile connection. The world outside could wait for now. For tonight, there was only the simple truth. She did not have to be alone. And he, for the first time in years, realized that perhaps he did not want to be alone either. The morning sun rose slowly over the ranch, spreading soft, golden light across the fields. The wind was gentle, carrying the smell of wildflowers and fresh earth. Birds chirped in the distance, and the cows wandered slowly through the pasture, their hooves brushing against the dry grass. Inside the small cabin, the girl woke up early, rubbing her eyes and stretching her small arms. She had slept more deeply than she had in many nights. For the first time in a long while, she felt safe. The rancher was already outside, checking on the animals. He paused for a moment when he saw the girl stepping out of the cabin, her bare feet sinking slightly into the soft ground. She looked at him nervously, as if unsure whether she truly belonged there. The rancher gave her a small nod, a silent sign that she was welcome. She smiled faintly in return, a tiny spark of trust shining in her eyes. After breakfast, the rancher began his daily chores, repairing a broken fence post and checking on the water troughs. The girl watched him quietly, trying to understand what she could do to help. She had grown up learning survival skills, but she had never lived on a ranch. Everything was new: the animals, the tools, the smell of hay and leather. Yet she felt curious and determined. She wanted to be useful, to show that she could belong here, even if only for a short time. The rancher noticed her hesitation. "Do you want to help?" he asked. His voice was calm, patient, and without pressure. She nodded eagerly. "Yes," she whispered. He handed her a small bucket. "Fill it with water for the horses," he said. She took it carefully, balancing it as she walked toward the trough. Water sloshed slightly over the edges, but she managed it well. The rancher watched her closely, impressed by her careful movements. Though she was small, she showed patience, focus, and a quiet strength he did not expect. Over the next few days, the girl began to settle into the rhythm of ranch life. She learned how to feed the animals, gather firewood, and sweep the cabin floor. Each task was a small victory, and she took pride in doing them well. The rancher, in turn, began to notice her intelligence and resilience. She asked questions, watched carefully, and remembered everything he showed her. He began to respect her, not just as a guest, but as someone capable and strong, despite her young age and her fragile appearance. Evenings were the hardest for the girl. She would sit by the window staring at the distant hills, thinking of her family and wondering if she would ever see them again. Sometimes she cried quietly, hiding her face in her hands so the rancher would not notice. He understood her pain. Though he never asked too many questions, he simply sat nearby, sometimes reading from a book, sometimes tending to small repairs, giving her the space to grieve and heal at her own pace. One afternoon, a storm began to brew on the horizon. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, and the wind picked up, shaking the trees and rattling the cabin windows. The rancher hurried to secure the animals, closing gates and checking fences. The girl followed him closely, carrying small tools and helping where she could. Together they worked as a team, moving quickly but carefully. Despite the storm, there was a sense of partnership growing between them, a silent understanding that they could rely on each other when danger or hardship came. When the rain finally began, it poured down heavily, drumming against the roof of the cabin. The girl and the rancher sat near the fire, drying off and warming themselves. The girl shivered slightly, and the rancher offered her a blanket. "You're safe here," he said quietly. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. She wanted to believe him, wanted to feel that safety, but the world had taught her caution. Slowly, she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel hope, however small. As the days turned into weeks, the rancher and the girl learned more about each other. They spoke when they could, though their words were often simple and measured. The girl had a few words of English learned from travelers and neighbors, while the rancher had no knowledge of her native language. They communicated through gestures, expressions, and the shared rhythm of daily life. Even without perfect understanding, they formed a connection stronger than words could explain. One morning, the girl shared a small story about her life before arriving at the ranch. She spoke of her family, the people she had lost, and the home she once knew. Though her English was broken, the rancher could understand her sorrow. He listened quietly, letting her speak without interruption. Her voice trembled at times, but she continued, driven by the need to tell someone her story. The rancher realized that this was part of the trust she was offering him, the gift of her truth, her past, and her pain. The rancher also shared small stories from his own life. He spoke of the land, of his days as a young man learning to live alone, and of the hardships he had faced. The girl listened intently, her dark eyes wide with curiosity. Though she did not always understand everything he said, she appreciated his openness. For both of them, these moments of sharing created a bridge, a connection that went beyond language or culture. They were learning to be family in their own way, chosen and built through care, patience, and respect. Life at the ranch was not always easy. The girl sometimes struggled with the chores, and the rancher often worried about how much she had endured, yet they encouraged each other in small ways. A nod, a smile, a word of praise, these small gestures became the foundation of their growing bond. Slowly, the rancher realized that he was no longer just helping a lonely child. He was witnessing a remarkable spirit, someone who could survive and thrive despite the challenges life had thrown at her. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned shades of pink and purple, the girl sat quietly on the porch, looking out over the open land. The rancher joined her, and they sat together in silence, listening to the distant sounds of the land, the rustle of grass, the low moo of cows, the whisper of the wind. For a moment the world felt peaceful, as if nothing could touch them here. The girl leaned slightly against the rancher, a small gesture of trust and comfort. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, feeling a warmth and connection he had never experienced before. In those quiet moments, the rancher understood something important. Letting the girl stay had been more than an act of kindness. It had been a choice that changed them both. He was no longer just a man living alone on a distant ranch. He was a protector, a guide, and a friend. And the girl, who had once feared being alone, was finding a place where she could belong, even if only temporarily. Days passed and the seasons began to shift. The air grew cooler, and the colors of the land changed as autumn approached. The rancher and the girl continued their routines, learning from each other and growing closer. Though the world outside could be harsh and unforgiving, inside the small cabin and across the ranch, they had created a safe space. A place where trust, care, and understanding could thrive, and yet both knew that this peace might not last forever. Life on the open land could be unpredictable and strangers could come asking questions. The rancher understood the risks, and the girl understood that she could not stay forever. But for now, they focused on each day, each moment of connection and learning, each small victory in building trust and companionship. In the evenings, the girl would often sit by the fire, her small hands warming by the glow. The rancher would read quietly or repair tools nearby, giving her space but always remaining close. The girl sometimes spoke of her hopes, of finding her family again, of seeing familiar faces, of feeling completely safe in the world. The rancher listened, offering quiet encouragement, never promising more than he could give, but always giving the comfort of presence. In these simple routines, a quiet miracle unfolded. Two lives, so different and yet so alike, had found each other. A bond was forming, not of obligation, not of fear, but of trust, understanding, and shared humanity. They were teaching each other that even in a world that could be cruel and lonely, kindness and care could make a difference. And so, life continued on the ranch, each day bringing small lessons, small victories, and small moments of joy. The girl was learning to trust again, to hope again, and to believe that she could survive and even thrive. The rancher was learning that life, though quiet and lonely for many years, could still offer unexpected companionship and connection. In the stillness of the open land, both were growing stronger, braver, and more hopeful, ready for whatever the next day might bring. The days grew longer and warmer as summer edged into early autumn. The ranch stretched under the golden sun, the grass swaying gently in the wind, and the sky painted in soft blues and whites. Life on the ranch had settled into a quiet rhythm, but the connection between the girl and the rancher was deepening in ways neither of them fully understood. They were no longer just caretaker and guest. Slowly, they were becoming companions, learning from each other, teaching each other, and beginning to trust each other in ways that words could not always express. The girl had grown more confident in her work around the ranch. She fed the animals without fear, carried water to the troughs, and even helped mend the fences under the rancher's careful guidance. She learned the subtle language of the land, the sound of hooves on soft dirt, the rustle of birds in the trees, the quiet signals of the weather changing. Every day, the rancher watched her with a mixture of pride and quiet amazement. He had expected her to be fragile and unsure, but she had proved herself strong, intelligent, and capable. One morning, the girl followed the rancher as he went to check the distant pasture. The sun was bright but gentle, and the air smelled faintly of fresh grass and wildflowers. As they walked, she asked questions about the ranch, the animals, and the distant hills that stretched toward the horizon. Though her English was limited, she communicated with careful words and gestures, and the rancher listened patiently, answering slowly and clearly. He realized that she was eager to learn, not just to survive, but to understand the world around her. The rancher began teaching her small skills that went beyond the daily chores. He showed her how to read the sky for signs of weather, how to track animals through footprints and broken twigs, and how to use simple tools for repairs. The girl absorbed everything like a sponge, asking questions whenever she was unsure, and practicing again and again until she felt confident. The rancher found himself admiring her patience and determination. She was not only learning, she was growing stronger every day, and he could see a quiet pride shining in her eyes. But it was not only lessons about work or survival that they shared. Slowly, their bond grew in the small, quiet ways that matter most. Sometimes they worked side by side in silence, their movements synchronized without speaking. Sometimes they laughed quietly at small mistakes like spilled water or a frightened chicken running across the yard. And sometimes they simply sat together, watching the land and listening to the soft sounds of nature. Words were not always necessary. Their presence spoke volumes. The girl's trust in the rancher was growing too. At first, she had been cautious, keeping her distance emotionally, unsure if she could truly belong anywhere again. But as the days passed, she realized that he did not judge her, did not question her past, and did not push her to speak before she was ready. He offered safety, warmth, and quiet companionship, and slowly she allowed herself to lean on him in small ways. A question, a smile, or a touch of her hand on the fence when she needed reassurance. One afternoon, a small problem arose with one of the cows. The animal had wandered into a thorny patch and could not free itself. The rancher and the girl rushed to help, working together to untangle the frightened cow. The girl's small hands were careful and precise, and the rancher guided her with gentle words. They succeeded in freeing the animal without causing it harm, and the girl's face lit up with a triumphant smile. "I did it!" she whispered softly, her eyes shining. The rancher nodded, proud. "You did," he said. "I knew you could." In that moment, a quiet sense of accomplishment and trust filled the air between them. Life on the ranch was not always easy, though. The girl sometimes struggled with exhaustion, frustration, or fear. She had grown up learning to fend for herself, and now she was learning to trust someone else to care for her. That was not always simple. The rancher noticed her quiet moments of doubt, when she stared out at the hills with a faraway look, or when her hands trembled slightly while performing a new task. He never forced her to speak or explain herself. Instead, he offered quiet support, small words of encouragement, and patient guidance. Over time, these gestures helped her feel more confident and secure. One evening, the girl asked the rancher about his life before she arrived. She wanted to understand why he lived so far from people and towns, and what had made him choose this solitary life. The rancher thought for a long moment, then began to speak. He told her stories of his childhood, of learning to live on the land, of challenges he had faced and lessons he had learned. He spoke slowly and simply, choosing words she could understand. The girl listened intently, her eyes wide with curiosity, and occasionally asked questions to clarify something she did not understand. In sharing his life, the rancher offered her not just knowledge, but connection. The girl also began to share small pieces of her past. She spoke of her family, of days spent in a home filled with laughter and love, and of the time she had been separated from them. Though her words were sometimes broken, the rancher could understand the depth of her loss and the courage it had taken to survive alone. Each story brought them closer. Each memory shared strengthened the trust and understanding between them. The cabin and ranch had become more than a safe place. They had become a space for healing, for learning, and for companionship. As the weeks passed, the bond between them grew stronger, and the girl began to show small signs of confidence and independence. She would take initiative in her chores, notice small problems before the rancher did, and even offer suggestions for improvements around the ranch. The rancher, in turn, began to rely on her judgment, recognizing her growing skills and intelligence. They were no longer simply teacher and student, caretaker and guest. They were partners in the daily life of the ranch. Yet, despite the growing warmth and trust between them, the outside world loomed quietly in the distance. News of unusual activity on the ranch traveled slowly through the nearby settlements. Some neighbors began to ask questions about the girl, curious about her presence and her background. The rancher understood that the quiet peace they had built could be fragile. Though he had chosen to help her, he knew that others might not understand or accept his decision. This knowledge added a quiet tension to their days, a subtle reminder that safety was never guaranteed. The girl, though aware of the potential danger, did not show fear outwardly. She trusted the rancher and trusted the space they had created together. Yet, she began to prepare herself quietly, learning from him not only how to survive in the present, but also how to be ready for challenges that might come from outside. She observed, learned, and practiced, growing stronger and more capable each day. One evening, as the sun set and the sky glowed in shades of gold and pink, the rancher and the girl sat together on the porch. They watched the distant hills, the cows moving slowly through the pasture, and the wind playing gently with the grass. The girl leaned slightly against the rancher, a gesture of comfort and trust. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, feeling the bond that had grown between them. They did not speak much, but in the quiet, they understood each other perfectly. In that silence, the rancher realized something important. Letting her stay had been more than an act of kindness. It had been a choice that changed them both. He was no longer just a man living alone on a remote ranch. He was a protector, a guide, and a friend. And the girl who had once feared being alone was finding a place where she could learn, grow, and feel safe. For both of them, the small, quiet moments of connection mattered as much as any words could. As night fell, the girl curled up in her bed, feeling the warmth of the cabin and the quiet presence of someone who cared for her. The rancher sat nearby, listening to the soft sounds of the land, the rustle of the wind, the distant calls of animals, and the gentle breathing of the girl. In these simple, ordinary moments, something extraordinary was happening. Two lives so different and yet so alike were intertwining, forming a bond built on trust, care, and understanding. Even though the world outside was unpredictable and sometimes dangerous, inside the small cabin and across the ranch they had created a safe space. A space where learning, growth, and healing could take place. A space where kindness and companionship mattered more than fear or suspicion. And in this space, both the rancher and the girl were discovering the quiet power of connection, courage, and hope. The warm days of late summer began to fade, and the first hints of autumn colored the hills in shades of gold and brown. The air was crisp in the mornings, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and dry earth. Life on the ranch had grown steady, almost peaceful, as the girl and the rancher continued their routines. They moved together through the chores, shared quiet moments by the cabin fire, and learned to communicate with a language built of gestures, glances, and trust. But the calm of the ranch could not last forever. One afternoon, while the rancher was mending a fence near the edge of the property, he noticed dust rising on the distant road. Squinting in the sunlight, he saw two riders approaching. They were strangers to him, their faces serious and questioning. The rancher felt a sudden unease, a warning that their quiet life might soon be disturbed. He motioned for the girl to stay in the cabin, but she moved quickly to follow him, unwilling to be left alone. The riders came closer, and the rancher could hear their voices carrying over the dry wind. They asked questions about the girl, about why she was on the ranch, and where she had come from. The rancher answered cautiously, careful not to reveal too much. He had always lived by a code of honesty, but he also knew the dangers of telling the wrong person too much. The girl watched from behind him, her small hands gripping the edge of the fence, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The rancher understood immediately that the girl's presence was now a matter of concern, not only for himself but for her safety. He could see the worry in her eyes, even though she tried to hide it. She had grown accustomed to hardship, to being cautious, and to protecting herself.
Yet now she faced the unknown, people who might not understand her story, who might see her as a problem rather than a child in need of care.
As the riders left, the rancher knew that more people could come asking questions. Word of her presence on the ranch would spread, and he could not control how others might react. That night, as the girl sat by the fire, she sensed his unease. "Are they going to take me?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The rancher shook his head slowly, placing a reassuring hand on hers. "Not if I can help it," he said, "but we must be careful." His voice carried a quiet determination, a promise of protection that gave her a small sense of comfort. The following days were tense. The rancher became more watchful, observing the horizon and the roads leading to the ranch. He made sure the animals were secure, the gates locked, and the cabin ready in case they needed to hide. He taught the girl simple precautions, how to listen for strangers approaching, how to stay quiet, and how to move carefully across the land. She absorbed every word, practicing diligently, knowing that her safety depended on both their actions.
Despite the looming threat, the girl did not lose her courage.
She continued her chores with determination, tending to the animals and helping the rancher wherever she could. Each day she grew stronger, more confident, and more capable. The rancher noticed this, and though the worry never fully left him, he felt a quiet pride in her resilience. She was no longer just a scared child. She was someone who could face challenges, adapt, and survive. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows across the ranch, The girl approached the rancher with a small bundle of firewood. "I want to help more," she said quietly. Her words were simple, but they carried a determination that touched the rancher deeply. He nodded, placing a hand on her shoulder.
"You already help more than you know," he said.
"But I understand. We'll face what comes together." In that moment, they were no longer teacher and student or caretaker and guest. They were partners facing the uncertainties of the world together. The tension of the outside world continued to grow. Neighbors occasionally passed by, asking curious questions, and the girl began to notice the cautious glances of strangers. One afternoon, a local man came near the ranch, claiming he had heard rumors about a lone girl staying there. The rancher met him at the fence, speaking carefully and calmly, trying to explain without revealing too much. The man left, but the incident reminded them both that their peace was fragile and that danger could arrive without warning. The girl, sensing the growing tension, began to prepare herself emotionally. She thought about what she would do if someone tried to take her away, how she could protect herself and the rancher, and how she could remain brave, even in fear. Though she was still small and young, she had learned survival and courage from her own experiences. She had also learned to trust the rancher, and that trust gave her strength. Together, they created quiet strategies for safety, small routines that kept them alert and prepared for unexpected challenges. One night, a storm rolled in unexpectedly. Thunder rumbled across the hills, and lightning split the sky in brilliant streaks of white and gold. Rain pounded the roof of the cabin, and the wind howled through the trees. The girl shivered, uncertain and scared, and the rancher pulled her close, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "You're safe here," he said firmly, though even he felt the tension of the storm outside. For hours they stayed together, listening to the power of nature, finding comfort in their shared presence. In moments like this, fear was tempered by connection, and the girl realized that even in danger, she was not alone. As the storm passed, the rancher and the girl stepped outside to inspect the land. Fallen branches and puddles covered the paths, but the animals were safe, and the cabin had held firm. They moved together across the wet ground, helping each other navigate, sharing small laughs at the minor mishaps caused by the storm. Despite the challenges, there was a growing sense of resilience between them, a quiet confidence that they could face what came next. Days later, a stranger came riding along the path, this time with a more serious purpose. He asked pointed questions about the girl, about her origin, and about why she was on the ranch. The rancher answered cautiously, careful not to reveal too much while keeping the girl nearby. The encounter was tense, a silent reminder that the outside world would not always be understanding or kind. The stranger eventually left, but the rancher and the girl both knew that their peaceful life could be threatened again. That night, they sat together on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the dark sky. The girl leaned against the rancher, feeling the warmth of his presence and the protection he offered.
"Will it always be like this?"
she asked softly. The rancher thought for a moment, then shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "The world can be hard and unpredictable, but for now, we are safe. And we will face what comes together." His words were steady, calm, and full of reassurance. She nodded, feeling a quiet courage grow inside her. The next few weeks were a delicate balance of work, vigilance, and quiet companionship. They continued the routines of the ranch, repairing fences, tending animals, and preparing for the coming season. The girl learned not only practical skills but also emotional resilience, the ability to face uncertainty without fear, the ability to trust someone fully, and the ability to find strength in small acts of courage. The rancher, in turn, learned patience, compassion, and the quiet joy of seeing someone grow stronger under his care. As the season began to turn toward winter, both the rancher and the girl knew that the challenges they faced were far from over. Rumors would continue, neighbors would remain curious, and the outside world could bring dangers they had not yet imagined. Yet, in the quiet spaces of the ranch, they had found something rare and precious: trust, courage, and the knowledge that they were not alone. In these moments, the girl reflected on how far she had come. She had arrived at the ranch frightened, alone, and uncertain. Now she was learning to stand tall, to face challenges, and to trust someone again. The rancher, too, reflected on the change she had brought to his life. He had lived for years in quiet solitude, believing he needed no one, and yet she had shown him the power of companionship, care, and shared courage. And so, even as the world beyond the ranch continued to present challenges and uncertainty, the girl and the rancher prepared themselves for whatever would come next. Together, they had learned to trust, to protect, and to face fear with courage. And though danger might arrive at any moment, they were ready to meet it. Not as teacher and student or caretaker and guest, but as companions who had built a bond strong enough to face the world together. The air had grown crisp and cool, signaling the arrival of late autumn. The hills surrounding the ranch were painted in shades of orange, red, and gold, and the wind carried the soft rustle of fallen leaves. Life on the ranch had settled into a rhythm, but the rancher and the girl both knew that their quiet peace might not last forever. The world outside was unpredictable, and sooner or later they would have to face changes that could not be controlled. The girl had grown stronger, braver, and more confident over the months she had spent on the ranch. She moved through the chores with ease, tending to the animals, carrying water, and helping with repairs. She no longer flinched at loud noises, storms, or the sudden arrival of strangers. Her small hands and quick mind had learned the ways of the land, and her spirit had learned to trust another human being. But beneath her growing confidence, a quiet worry remained. She knew that she could not stay on the ranch forever. The rancher, too, had changed. He had lived for years in quiet solitude, believing that no one could be trusted, and that life was better lived alone. But the girl had shown him something he had forgotten: the value of companionship, the joy of shared responsibility, and the warmth that comes from caring for someone who truly needs you. He had learned patience, tenderness, and the quiet strength it takes to protect someone else. The bond between them was deep, built on trust, shared hardships, and mutual respect. One morning, a rider arrived on the ranch. This time he brought news that could not be ignored. There were people from the girl's community, looking for her and hoping to reunite her with her family. The rancher listened carefully, understanding both the opportunity and the challenge. He knew that keeping her safe was important, but he also knew that she deserved a chance to reconnect with her family, to find the people she had lost. The girl listened quietly, her heart beating fast. She had spent months learning to trust again, and she had grown to care deeply for the rancher who had given her safety, guidance, and companionship. Yet she also felt hope, a small spark of excitement, at the thought of seeing her family again. Mixed with that hope was fear. Fear of leaving the only safe place she had known in months, fear of the unknown, and fear of saying goodbye to the rancher who had become like family to her. The rancher saw the worry in her eyes. He took her small hands in his and spoke softly. "You have grown so strong here," he said. "And now it is time for you to see your family. I will help you get there safely. You will never be alone again." His voice was calm, steady, and full of reassurance. The girl nodded, tears forming in her eyes, understanding the truth of his words. Preparations were made, quietly. The rancher helped her gather belongings she would need for the journey. They repaired the cabin, secured the animals, and made sure everything was ready for her departure. Every action was careful and deliberate, a reflection of the care they had both learned to show for one another. Despite the quiet sadness that hung in the air, there was also a sense of hope and anticipation. On the day of departure, the rancher and the girl walked together across the ranch, taking in the sights one last time. She touched the fence posts, patted the animals, and looked out over the rolling hills, committing the landscape to memory. The rancher watched her carefully, seeing how much she had grown in courage and independence. He remembered the first day she had arrived, alone, frightened, and uncertain, and marveled at how far she had come. When the rider arrived to take the girl to her family, she turned to the rancher. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "For everything. The rancher knelt down to her level, taking her hands in his. "You're brave," he said. "And you are ready. Never forget what you have learned here. And know that you are always welcome wherever life takes you." Her eyes filled with tears, and she hugged him tightly, feeling the warmth of the bond they had built. The journey to her family was not long, but every mile felt significant. The girl rode with a quiet excitement, looking forward to reuniting with her people while carrying the memory of the rancher's kindness, guidance, and trust. She felt a mixture of relief and nervousness, knowing that her life was about to change once more. The lessons she had learned at the ranch, patience, courage, compassion, and resilience, would guide her as she stepped into this new chapter. When she arrived, the reunion with her family was emotional and filled with tears of joy. Her relatives embraced her, asking questions and sharing stories, and she listened with wide eyes and a full heart. Yet, even in this joyful moment, she thought of the rancher, of the quiet cabin, of the lessons and love he had shared with her. She understood that she owed much of her courage and growth to the months she had spent on the ranch, and she carried that gratitude silently in her heart. Back at the ranch, the rancher returned to his daily life. The cabin felt quieter without her presence, and the chores seemed lonelier. Yet, he felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that he had helped someone who had needed him. He reflected on the months they had spent together, the lessons they had taught each other, the trust they had built, and the bond that had grown stronger than either had expected. Though the ranch was physically quiet, the memory of her presence filled it with warmth and meaning. The seasons changed again, moving from autumn into winter. Snow blanketed the hills, and the wind carried a sharp chill. Life on the ranch continued, but the rancher often found himself pausing at moments when he remembered her, the way she had learned to carry water carefully, the way she had laughed at small mistakes, the way she had grown brave enough to face fear with quiet courage. These memories brought him comfort and a sense of purpose. The girl, now reunited with her family, carried the lessons of the ranch with her. She helped her relatives with daily tasks, shared her knowledge of animals and the land, and demonstrated the confidence and resilience she had gained. Though her surroundings had changed, she remained the brave, capable girl who had learned to trust and to grow in the presence of someone who had cared for her. The bond with the rancher remained in her heart, guiding her decisions and comforting her in moments of uncertainty. Letters and messages were exchanged when possible. The rancher would hear news of her progress, her happiness, and her continued courage. Each word was a reminder that the time they had spent together had not been in vain. The girl's life had been changed by his kindness, and the rancher's life had been enriched by her trust and companionship. They had given each other something rare, the knowledge that even in a harsh and unpredictable world, connection and care could create lasting impact. Years passed, and both the rancher and the girl grew older. They continued to live their lives, shaped by the bond they had shared. Though distance separated them physically, the memory of their time together remained vivid and meaningful. The rancher continued to work the land, carrying the quiet pride of having helped someone grow stronger and braver. The girl, now more mature and confident, carried the lessons of trust, compassion, and courage into every aspect of her life. The story of the girl and the rancher became a quiet legend in the area, a tale of unexpected companionship, bravery, and the power of kindness. People would speak of the rancher who had taken in a lost child and the girl who had grown stronger under his care. It was a story that reminded others of the importance of trust, compassion, and courage, even in times of fear and uncertainty. And though the years moved on, the quiet bond between them endured. The rancher knew that he had made a difference, not just in her life, but in the meaning of his own. The girl knew that she had been given a gift beyond measure, a safe place, guidance, and the trust of someone who truly cared. Their lives, forever touched by each other, carried the quiet proof that small acts of kindness and courage could change destinies, heal hearts, and create hope where there was once fear. In the end, the rancher often sat by the cabin porch, watching the sun rise and set over the rolling hills, remembering the brave girl who had walked into his life one lonely evening. And somewhere, far away with her family, the girl would look at the sky, remember the ranch, and smile quietly, knowing that she had not been alone. And that, for a time, she had found someone who truly understood her.